this address. It's not too far from the church. Over on Gilman Boulevard beside the church. These cars are really good ones. Just meet me there. Eric has never emailed me. It said Eric at all. Never. Of course, I mean, you read it, you know. I'm not a Bible scholar, but narration. This musical. I didn't type he said it was narration that talked about, you know, they were walking Jesus to the Calvary. And there's a comic where it says he was being flogged. FLOSS. Or he was being flossed. My friend Rose. We have no idea what happens with that little action. How that got in the print. I wish I would have put the right times on the treatments.
Notice they have all of the damage already up.
That's, I guess they're not gonna be careful, they have to.
Our session today, I think.
on the first Sunday of Advent, to those present in worship and to those who will be joining us via live stream. Just a week ago, the room was not prepared for us, but volunteers worked rather feverishly last Sunday afternoon and made the place ready for Advent and Christmas to come. So thank you to all who made that possible. So I invite you now to focus upon our theme for this season of Advent. It's walking in the light of the Lord. If in worship you feel the need to stand up and walk around, go ahead. Our hope is to encounter again God's presence here in worship and in our neighbors as we worship. Let Advent begin.
Standing for the call to worship. Wait for the Lord. Let not your heart be troubled.
We will wait for the Lord, for God is our help and our shield.
Wait for the Lord. Make your heart ready to receive the coming King.
Come quickly to help us, our Savior and King. We will
Put our hope in the Lord, now and evermore.
God, we praise you for the prophets like Isaiah. They were the first ones to tell of the birth of Jesus. Their words gave people hope. Help us to have hope in our lives because we know that Jesus is coming. Amen.
From Psalm 122. I was glad when they said to me, "Let us go to the house of the Lord." Our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem, built as a city that is bound firmly together. To it the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, as was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. For there the thrones for judgment were set up, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Peace be within your walls and security within your towers. For the sake of my relatives and friends, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good.
Will you stand as you are able for the reading of the gospel? Our gospel reading this morning comes from Matthew chapter 24, beginning with verse 36. But about that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of man. Then the two will be in the field. One will be taken, one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together. One will be taken, and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this: if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. This is the gospel of grace. Thanks be to God.
During the Sundays of Advent, our Old Testament readings will all come from the prophet Isaiah. And I invite you to find the Pew Bible before you, or perhaps you have your own, and read along with me, just to ensure that I'm reading the right text, if for no other reason. Today, this passage full of poignant symbols, Isaiah 2, and I begin reading with the second verse. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many peoples shall come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. The Lord shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord." May God add blessing and understanding to the hearing of these words. Perhaps you've heard the proverbial story of the man searching for his keys under a street lamp. When a passerby asks the man whether he lost his keys at that spot, the man says that he actually lost them at home. He was looking for the keys under the lamp because the light there is the brightest. Biochemist Arthur Kornberg once compared the discipline of modern biology in its early days to the man looking for his lost keys. Experiments, he said, were so difficult to perform on biological organisms that scientists were severely constrained in their experimental choices. He writes, experiments were conducted on the simplest model organisms, fruit flies, sea urchins, bacteria, slime molds, because the light there was the brightest. The prophet Isaiah called the Hebrew people to walk in the light of the Lord because the light there is the brightest. Perhaps you read past that line in our Old Testament lesson just a moment ago. Understandable. We expect light at the flip of a switch. Over the past year or so, I've had the pleasure of assisting our PDO staffer, Lindsay, bring in her twins on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Regardless which one's in my arms, sometimes both, we always pause at the hall light switch. One flip never satisfies. Up, down, then up and down. It's not the actual surprise the twins are looking for. That can only happen once, but for a certain surprisingness. Light for Isaiah and his contemporaries was awash in surprisingness. The dawn prior to sunrise was a marvel to the ancients every morning. At the very least, evidence to them that God had pursued a special goal in creating this world. But there was comfort. Comfort in that dawn indicates the darkness will not last. In the light of the new day is discovery that under the right circumstances, one is capable of tolerating anything. The first to hear Isaiah's message had witnessed the fall of the city of Jerusalem and the surrounding hamlets. Forced from their homes, they took up residence in a strange place, Babylon. How quickly they learned that darkness is not merely the absence of light. The abandonment by the God who had rescued them from slavery and brought them into the land of promise left them bewildered as the ginkgo leaves now on the ground having fallen from a tree. Bewildered, wouldn't you say? The starting point of exile is not the place
you've moved to, but the ending that you must make to leave the old place behind. Now, I get the need for new Bible translations ever so often. Language changes constantly. Phrases such as gay old time and dial it up fail to reach Generation X. I always hoped that the number I was dialing on one of the rotary dial telephones didn't have a lot of nines. Now, I'm committed to language in worship being as inclusive as possible. One difficulty of seeking to modernize the language is finding the best judges of what works and what doesn't. Often, form occludes the content. I think one pitfall goes to the use of metaphor. It's my humble opinion that newer Bible translations err when they veer towards abstraction and away from metaphor. One newer translation offered by Oxford went to great lengths to eliminate the use of metaphor. The translation committee omitted metaphors of darkness as being too close to darkies and therefore racist. Thus, John 1:5 reads, "The light shines in the deepest night, and the night did not overcome it." It's missing something. Poet and Christian Kathleen Norris writes tongue-in-cheek, "What time of night? 1 a.m.? 3? The treachery of darkness is domesticated." Now, the first to hear Isaiah preach were a people living in a place not of their own choosing. Jettisoned 500 miles west at the point of a spear, they found themselves walking where the streets have no names. That journey must have been one of unspeakable horror. Picture an entire population becoming one moving part of something like a kafil, an African term derived from the Arabic word kafila, a chained slave caravan. Like the Grinch who stole Christmas from the people of Whoville, Nebuchadnezzar stole their lives. You might say he stunk. The simple but profound goods they all cherished erased off the board. The old story was over, but a new one was not on the horizon. To realize that the life one has created is no longer the life one can live is to be thrown headfirst into contingency, subject to change. Next month marks the anniversary of the tornadic activity that leveled Mayfield, Kentucky and surrounding areas. Visiting the site on 2 different occasions is etched on my memory. And this summer with the youth and some adults, we went to Bremen, Kentucky. The same intensity of a place just wiped out. Life structures disappeared overnight, leaving untold numbers of people, an unrecognizable landscape to navigate. Even the trees gone. For the survivors, life slowed down. As Dan Mosley says, when you can't see very well, you just don't move as fast. Now, it's generally held that the book of Isaiah is rooted in the actual prophetic personality, Isaiah, son of Amos, whose conventional dates for living in Jerusalem are sometime between 742, 689 BC. Accepting such conventional judgment, we can say that Isaiah lived through a series of public crises equivalent to the severe weather last December and the insurrection of January 6th. Walter Brueggemann classifies his ministry as harsh judgment and buoyant promise. Perhaps here the proverbial, "I've got bad news, good news" works. The bad news, Isaiah said, "You're going to be in Babylon a while. Get used to it." But the good news, peace is on the horizon. And the imagery is very stark. Swords become plowshares. Spears become pruning hooks. But the real kicker, nations will no longer invest huge parts of their national budgets in defense, learning war. weapons of war will be transformed into implements of agriculture and the making of wine. The vision of weapons of war becoming instruments for human flourishing resonates, I think. And for us to absorb the power of these words, we might need to consider the reverse. With metal essential to the war industry in short supply, the imperial government of Germany issued a decree in March 1917 to turn church bells into weapons of war. They would go to an ironworks to be identified, melted, and turned into guns. This decision distressed many citizens, even those who were not Christian. One deacon said, melting down these instruments of the church and turning them into artillery gave the bells the opposite meaning. Peace was eviscerated. A bold and daring text, Isaiah 2:2-5. Isaiah sees a day when all the nations will come in procession to Jerusalem. They will be inducted into God's way, God's Torah. Fueling the theology of Isaiah was the tradition that held that God dwelt in Jerusalem. It was God's house on earth. His contemporary, the prophet Jeremiah, was less grounded in this David Zion tradition of Judah. You see, he didn't trust the nationalistic agenda of those rulers and priests who thought national survival depended upon self-rule and that they continue life as it had been, an oppressive system at times. Although Jerusalem remained the religious and cultural center of Judaism, Jeremiah viewed the covenant with God to be paramount. Israel could and would be God's people in Babylon. Well, Jeremiah's peace party lost, and things blew up like a grenade. This cataclysmic upheaval of deportment changed a lot of things. However, exile did not eliminate God as a key player in their lives. Exile is the place where we make decisions about faithfulness, what it means to be human. What does it mean to live in covenant with God in the face of powers of despair and defeat? The people of Israel were not innocent victims per se, for they had misplaced their faith, trusting in kings and principalities to secure their future. They were partly responsible. Writer David Milch says a sobering line in his memoir, sometimes hating yourself is a fair response to the data. Isaiah speaks of a better day. The nations come gladly, willingly, expectantly to Jerusalem. No coercion is needed. They come like the beggar who's been told where there is hot, fresh bread. Peace and justice are available. And in coming gladly, the nations like Israel place themselves under God's Torah, God's instruction, or way, if you will. And the Torah, while seated in Jerusalem, is not the exclusive property of the Israelites. It belongs to the nations. So these words ring true. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, that the Lord may teach us the Lord's ways, and that we may walk in the path of the Lord. The law, the Torah, is not some oppressive burden, but think of it as a path cleared for you through the briars and the brambles so that you may pick those coveted berries. It's true, when you can't see the way before you, you don't move as fast. Or perhaps I should say you shouldn't move as fast. I often hear individuals tell of finding solace in the dark of sleep. Painful loss eventually depletes our energy, doesn't it? We lose our capacity to focus, or at least it's diminished. After Katrina, I found it very difficult to read. And reading was a significant part of my work, still is. Months later, it occurred to me one morning in my office that I was reading again. When navigating life and the daylight overwhelms, the temptation is to sleep. The dark of sleep is much more welcoming than the light of the reality that faces us. The inability to see the way forward, if not clearly, causes us to hesitate, slow down. One father who lost a daughter to leukemia spoke of the sadness, the brokenheartedness, bearing in his spirit an open wound. He writes, "I confess to you honestly that I have no wings with which to fly, or any legs on which to run. But listen, by the grace of God, I'm still on my feet." A paraphrase of the same prophet, Isaiah 40. You see, there are days, maybe even weeks, when just walking without fainting is a good thing. So on this first Sunday of Advent, the invitation is to walk. Thus, the lantern will be brought in each Sunday, reminding us to walk in the light of the Lord. We need not soar with eagles. If you can, go ahead, soar. Or to run like those younger individuals on Boulevard Bolt Day. Walk in the light of the Lord, because that's where the light is still the brightest. Looking around, I think I can say with some confidence that no one present knows what it's like to be deported, to be forced from your home, led captive into a strange land, imprisoned. Yet, when exile is understood as that place where decisions about faithfulness must be made, where we decide what it means to be human, and we have to draw on a courage to keep persisting, I think we can relate. You see, a facet of human nature is our ceaseless will to go on, even in the face of unspeakable pain or the treachery of the dark. So here's our question for this first Sunday of Advent. What does it mean to be human? We live in a cultural context where the crisis of identity concerns not persecution, but seduction into false notions of self. How quickly we notice how others are conforming to the pressures of the time. We're just less skillful on how we ourselves have joined the version of ideology that best suits us, or how we go along to get along. Perhaps your experience is like mine. You find the sound and fury of these days to be shrill, piercing. We watch the same things happen over and over again, the relentless violence and guns, uncertain as to a course of correction. And if we do happen upon a course of action to take, we're like Vladimir and what was his partner? At the end of Godot, they don't move. Our technological advance so outstrips our emotional capacity to control the strength that we are giving ourselves, like children playing with dynamite. And as Walter Brueggemann has pointed out, there are no answers in the back of the book to which we all assent. Go back a ways, William James posited that we may be in the universe as dogs and cats are in our libraries, seeing the books and hearing the conversations, but having no inkling to the meaning of it all. We are hobbled by the 21st century experience. It's an occupational hazard, I guess, living in this postmodern world. Now that phrase is used a lot, but again, I think Walter Brueggemann is spot on when he says postmodern signifies the breakup of any broad consensus about what we know or how we know what we know. Our present context, he says, is one where many different interpreters, in many different specific contexts, representing many different interests, are at work on textual and theological interpretation. Perhaps the fictional Humpty Dumpty sheds a brighter light when he says in a rather scornful tone to Alice, "When I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean." The question, Alice said, whether you can make words mean so many different things. Advent, at the very least, is a season of slowing down. That may be impossible given things are just going even faster around us. Slowing down enough to walk in the light of the Lord. Isaiah tapped into a facet of human nature, and that is our ceaseless will to go on, to persist. And he draws on a stark image, the image of light. And he says the way, that path through the briars and the brambles to peace, is lit by the light of the Lord, and the way is the instruction of the Lord. In Tolkien's first installment of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the wizard Gandalf leads Frodo and the Fellowship over the mountains, remember? But the only way was through the mines of Moria, underground tunnels. Gandalf walked in front as before. In his left hand he held up his glimmering staff, the light of which just showed the ground before his feet. Even in the gloom and despite all windings of the road, he knew whither he wished to go, and he did not falter as long as there was a path that led towards his goal. On this first Sunday of Advent, instruments of war seem indomitable. Do we dare pray for their diminishment? We remember that Isaiah asserts inescapable judgment. Some of the consequences are the results of some of the things we've done and failed to do. But he followed it by generous restoration, a mountain of the Lord's. Possibility of human beings living appropriately with each other and the creation. I guess the question is, how, as Christians, can we help bring it about? Perhaps we start by walking where the light is the brightest. Join me in silence, please. Lord, may your Spirit pierce any darkness in our lives, that we may see a way forward and seize the courage to take the steps to live in your way. I pray this in your good and abiding name. Amen.